The call came on a Thursday in October, while I was cataloguing soil samples in the back room of the University of Washington's field biology lab. My grandfather's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, spoke in short, careful sentences. Raymond had collapsed in his garden that morning, refused the ambulance, and was asking for me. Only me. I drove the 4 hours to the Olympic Peninsula through curtains of rain, the highway cutting through forests so dense they swallowed the afternoon light. My grandfather's property sat at the end of a logging road that had been abandoned since the 80s. 40 acres of second-growth hemlock and Douglas fir that bordered the national park. The cabin appeared through the mist like something conjured. Cedar shakes dark with moisture, windows glowing amber. Raymond sat in his armchair by the wood stove, oxygen cannula in his nostrils, but his eyes were sharp. At 87, he still had the hands of a man who'd worked timber his whole life, thick-knuckled and scarred. He waved away my concern with the impatience I remembered from childhood. "Sit down, Kira. We need to talk about the deliveries." "Deliveries?" I perched on the ottoman, noting the medical alert bracelet he'd never mentioned, the pill organizer on the side table. "Every Tuesday and Friday, for 43 years. He reached for a leather journal on the lamp table, its cover worn soft as cloth. "Started in 1981, March 17th. Your grandmother thought I was feeding bears. Let her think it." The journal opened to pages dense with notations in my grandfather's cramped hand. Dates, times, weather conditions, food items. 3/17/81, left venison scraps, apples, dried salmon at North Meadow Marker. 3/20/81, offering taken. Arrangement of stones left in return. Possible acknowledgement. "Grandpa, what is this?" "A record, a contract." He coughed, a wet sound that made me reach for the phone. He stopped me with a look. "I'm dying, girl. Prostate cancer, metastasized. Weeks, maybe. The deliveries can't stop, that's why you're here." Outside, something moved past the window. Large, unhurried. I caught only a shadow against the tree line, but my skin prickled with the atavistic certainty of being observed. Raymond saw my reaction. "He knows you're here. Been watching since you arrived." "Who?" "The one I made the agreement with. His family's been on this land longer than anyone's records go. Longer than the Kino have stories about. He's old now, like me, but the rules still hold." He handed me the journal. The entries spanned decades, evolving from terse observations to something approaching field notes, then to something else entirely. A chronicle of careful, incremental communication. I flipped forward, scanning. 7/4/83. Subject returned, carrying injured fawn. Placed it near cabin. Appeared to be requesting help. 11/12/85. Communication attempt. Arranged stones in deliberate pattern. Responded with similar arrangement. Interaction lasted 37 minutes. "You've been feeding, what, Sasquatch? For 40 years? Feeding isn't the right word. It's tribute, recognition. A way of saying, I see you, I respect your territory, we can coexist." He leaned forward, intensity brightening his fading eyes. "Your grandmother died in 2003. The night of her funeral, he came to the edge of the clearing, just stood there in the moonlight, close enough I could see his face. He knew. They understand grief, Kira. They understand debt." The scientist in me bristled at every word. Even as childhood memories surfaced, the inexplicable sense of presence during summer visits, the time I'd found my lost jacket folded on a stump a mile from where I'd dropped it, Raymond's absolute prohibition against hiking certain trails after dark. Why me? Why not tell someone who could actually document it, study it? That's exactly why not. His hand closed over mine, surprisingly strong. "I'm trusting you because you understand ecology. You know what happens when rare species get discovered. What happened to the gorillas, the orangutans? These people, yes, people, they've survived by being invisible, but they're dying out. Maybe 50 left in the whole Pacific Northwest, scattered. He's the last in this territory. When he's gone, there's no one. That's not, people can't just vanish like that. They can when they're intelligent enough to hide their dead, disciplined enough to stay clear of cameras, and careful enough to remove any trace that could be sequenced. He tapped a page dated 2019. Found cairn at North Meadow. Excavated carefully. Fragments of bone, burnt wood, lichen-covered stones, reburied exactly as found. Funeral marker. How many generations in one place? How many witnesses to this forest's history? Rain drummed harder against the roof. I thought of my dissertation research on keystone species preservation, the ethics seminars I'd taught, the careful debates about observer effect and intervention. All of it suddenly felt like theory divorced from the staggering weight of what my grandfather was proposing. You want me to continue feeding him? For how long? Until he's gone, or until someone comes after. But I don't think there will be anyone. The forest is emptier than it used to be. Raymond's voice carried an undertone of grief that made my throat tighten. There are rules, Kira, rules for the deliveries, for moving through the territory, for what you do if you encounter him directly. He taught them to me over years, slowly, carefully. They're in the journal, every protocol, every boundary. You need to learn them. You need to show him you can be trusted. And if I can't, if I don't believe... The knock at the door cut me off. 3 deliberate strikes, evenly spaced. Not the knock of a human hand, too low, too resonant. Raymond didn't move. He's asking permission to make contact, to assess you. The rules say I decide if he can approach. He looked at me steadily. But it's your choice. You can leave right now, drive back to Seattle, and I'll find another way. Or you can answer the door and step into something bigger than any research project you'll ever publish. My heart hammered. Every rational instinct screamed hoax, delusion, elaborate prank. But the journal in my hands was real, decades of meticulous observation. The knock, no human stood at that angle. I stood, crossed to the door. My hand on the knob was steady even as my mind reeled. Before you open it, Raymond said quietly, understand, you'll be asking him to trust a stranger with his survival, and he'll be asking you to carry a secret that could destroy him if you fail. Either of you can walk away right now, but once you open that door, you're entering the agreement. I thought of the forest outside, the vast, wet darkness of it, the weight of centuries pressing down through hemlock and cedar. I thought of my grandmother, who'd loved these woods with a fierceness I'd never quite understood. I thought of the loneliness in Raymond's voice when he spoke of emptiness. I opened the door. The figure on the porch stood 7 feet tall, perhaps more. In the spillage of light from the cabin, I registered impressions that my brain struggled to assemble into coherence. Reddish-brown hair matted with rain and forest debris, shoulders impossibly broad beneath their covering, arms that hung long and ended in hands that were uncannily similar to human ones, yet scaled to a different proportion. The face was hidden in shadow, but I caught the gleam of eyes reflecting the lamplight, amber gold, intelligent. He didn't move closer. The posture was non-threatening, almost tentative, waiting. He wants to smell you, Raymond called. Scent is how they remember, how they track trustworthiness over time. Hold out your hand, palm up. Don't move closer. Let him decide. I extended my right hand, willing it not to shake. The creature leaned forward slightly, and I caught the smell of him, earth and cedar, rain-wet fur. Something else beneath that was almost spicy, like disturbed mycelia or forest floor after the first autumn rain. Not unpleasant, ancient. He drew back after a moment that stretched like pulled taffy. Then, with movements surprisingly delicate for something so massive, he reached into a pouch or fold at his side. I couldn't see clearly, and withdrew something, placing it on the porch rail. Then he turned and melted into the darkness with such silence I questioned whether he'd been there at all. I stared at the object. A river stone, black basalt, perfectly ovoid. Resting on top of it, arranged with clear intention, 3 perfectly cleaned Chinook salmon vertebrae. Bring it inside, Raymond said. His voice was thick. He's accepted you. That's his marker. You'll leave it at the North Meadow site on Tuesday, with the first delivery. It tells him you're taking over the agreement. The vertebrae, that's a request. He's asking you to bring salmon. His teeth are failing, his age. Softer foods now. I picked up the stone, the bone. They were cool and smooth in my palm, tactile proof of the impossible. Now, Raymond said, settling back in his chair with visible relief, we start your education. The first rule, never speak of this to anyone who hasn't been introduced by him. Second rule, the forest has territories, and you need to learn which ones are his refuge. Third rule, you are not studying him. You're not collecting data for science. You're maintaining a relationship built on 43 years of mutual respect. Those rules aren't optional, Kira. They're survival, his and potentially yours. I sat back down, journal in one hand, the stone and bones in the other, and began to learn the rules of a forest I'd thought I'd understood. The rain fell, the fire crackled, and outside in the vast darkness, something old and careful waited to see if the agreement would hold through another generation. Raymond died on a Monday in November, 3 weeks after our conversation. I'd spent the intervening weekends at the cabin, apprenticing myself to routines that felt both mundane and profound, sorting the deliveries, never processed foods, always whole or minimally prepared. Venison Raymond got from hunter friends, salmon from the Quinault market, foraged mushrooms, apples from heritage trees on the property, learning the trails, memorizing the markers that delineated safe passage from prohibited zones. The North Meadow wasn't a meadow at all, but a slight opening in the canopy where a massive old-growth cedar had fallen decades ago, creating a gap the forest was slowly reclaiming. At the base of the cedar's root wad, a wall of earth and wood 10 feet high, someone had arranged flat stones into a natural shelf. This was the exchange point. I'd made 4 deliveries before Raymond's death. Each time, I followed the protocol exactly. Arrive before dawn, place food in the deer hide sack Raymond had provided, set the black basalt marker on top, retreat 50 yards, wait 30 minutes, then leave. The food was always gone by that evening. The funeral was small. Raymond had outlived most of his generation, and those who came were timber people, taciturn and weathered. Mrs. Chen squeezed my hand. You'll keep the place, won't you? He was so worried it would be sold, developed. He made me promise to witness his will. I had kept the place, took a leave from my doctoral program, moved into the cabin, told my advisor I was writing my dissertation remotely. All true, technically. I didn't mention that my real research was occurring in a language without words, in a protocol built from patience and offering. The first Friday delivery after Raymond's death, I arrived at the North Meadow at dawn to find something new. A circle of stones arranged in front of the root wad, about 6 feet in diameter, and inside it, carefully placed, a deer skull bleached white by time and weather. Arranged around the skull, 4 perfect crow feathers, a branch of cedar with needles still green, river stones graduated by size, and something that made my breath catch, a twisted piece of rusty metal that I recognized from Raymond's journal as the trigger guard from an old model Winchester, circa 1920s. I set down my delivery and studied the arrangement. This was deliberate communication, more complex than anything Raymond had described in recent years. A memory surfaced, journal entry from 1987, Raymond's notes on what he termed spatial grammar. The arrangements mean something, he'd written. Circles are boundaries or enclosures. Graduated sizes indicate sequence or time. Organic matter mixed with human artifacts, relationship between worlds. Need more observations to decode. The deer skull held the center. Death. The cedar was life, continuity. The feathers, corvids, were watchers, intelligent, liminal. The rifle part, aged and rusted, spoke of human history, perhaps violence. The stones, ordered by size, suggested progression or instruction. Was this a message about Raymond? A funeral acknowledgement? Or something else? I completed the delivery, placed the marker and retreated. Then, on impulse, I stepped back to the circle and added something of my own. A photograph from my pocket, one I'd been carrying. Raymond and me, age 7, standing in front of this very cabin. I weighted it down with a small stone and left. That night, I transcribed everything into a new journal, my own continuation of Raymond's record. Then I opened his entries from the late 80s and read about the years he'd spent learning this visual language, the painstaking process of trial and error, misunderstanding, and breakthrough. 4-12-89, arranged 3 sticks in triangle formation at sight. Next delivery, 3 stones arranged in same pattern, but larger. Mimicry, confirmation, testing my understanding. 7-8-89, he arranges, I copy, he rearranges. Back and forth for an hour. Finally achieved matching pattern. He huffed. Sound like satisfaction? Left immediately after. Communication established. I can learn. 10-23-91, breakthrough. Built on triangle, Judging stable structure, reliable agreement, circle, boundary, line of stones, path or direction. After weeks of practice, he added new element, stones stacked vertically. Height, importance, danger, will test. I fell asleep reading, woke before dawn and drove back to the North Meadow for the Tuesday delivery. The circle was gone, disassembled, but the photo remained, now placed on the stone shelf alongside the basalt marker, weighted with a new object, a clamshell, iridescent interior catching the weak morning light, and inside it, impossibly, one of Raymond's shirt buttons, the blue one from his favorite flannel. My eyes stung. He'd taken the button from Raymond's body or grave. No, that felt wrong. More likely from clothing Raymond had left out over the years, scent-marked items he'd apparently kept. This was acknowledgement, recognition of relationship, and placing it with my photo. Continuity. I was being accepted not as replacement, but as continuation. Over the next 3 months, through winter's darkest weeks, the education accelerated. He began leaving arrangements for me to decipher, and I would respond with my own, testing comprehension. The grammar expanded. Crosshatch pattern, danger, stay away. He used this to mark territories where sound carried to trails or roads. Curved line of stones, water source or movement path, teaching me the routes he used. Nested circles, protection, concealment. His core, refuges. Vertical stack with horizontal line across, prohibition, absolute boundary. The no-go zones. Organic matter woven through stones. This place's life is important. He used this pattern to show me which groves were critical habitat, which streams supported salmon runs he depended on. By February, I could read the forest differently. What had seemed random, a particular arrangement of fallen logs, stones clustered at a tree base, now revealed itself as deliberate marking. He'd been leaving signs for Raymond for decades, and now for me, a parallel landscape of meaning, invisible to anyone who hadn't learned the language. The night I understood the scope of it, that he'd essentially been cartographing a hidden territory through symbols, I sat at Raymond's desk and cried. The loneliness of it, the intelligence, a language developed over 40 years between 2 individuals, unrecorded, unrecognizable to anyone else. What died when such understanding vanished? March 17th marked 44 years since Raymond's first offering. I prepared something special. Fresh Chinook, still silver, purchased from the tribal fishery that morning. But I also brought paper, heavy watercolor stock and charcoal. At the North Meadow, I made a new arrangement, circle of stones like his. Inside, graduated sizes, largest to smallest, representing time passing. At the center, the black basalt marker he'd first given me, and beside it, the clamshell with Raymond's button. Then, I drew. My skills were mediocre, but I worked carefully. Raymond's face in profile, then my own, then a third figure, larger, different, left deliberately incomplete. I drew the cabin, the forest, the meadow marker. I drew the stone circle itself. Then I left the drawing weighted under the basalt. I didn't wait the usual 30 minutes. I waited 4 hours, hidden in a thicket of salal, cold and cramped, needing to see. He came in afternoon light, filtered through rain, moving through the understory like water through soil, present but undisturbing. larger than I'd fully registered that first night. The reddish-brown hair was grizzled grey around his face, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of age. He paused at the clearing edge, utterly still, testing the air. Then he approached the arrangement. He studied it for long minutes, head tilted, utterly silent. Then he picked up the drawing. I saw his hands clearly now, 4 fingers plus opposable thumb, nails not claws, palms broad and darkly calloused. The hands of someone who'd lived by gathering, climbing, making. He brought the paper close to his face. Poor eyesight, I realized, noting the way he angled his head, perhaps relying on peripheral vision. When he understood what he was seeing, his whole body stilled in a way that spoke of profound emotion. He set the paper down carefully. Then he did something I hadn't anticipated. He drew. Using a piece of charcoal I'd left, working on the back of my paper, he made marks. Not pictures exactly, more like complex symbols, whirls and lines and geometric forms I didn't recognize. He worked intently, and I realized I was witnessing something Raymond probably never had. Direct creation, the symbolic system he thought with. When finished, he placed the paper on the shelf with ceremony, the drawings face up. Then he added something from his pouch. A small carved figure, wood worn smooth by handling, representing something humanoid but not human. Alongside it, a length of sinew or plant fiber with knots tied at intervals. He turned toward my hiding place. I froze, but he didn't approach. Instead, he placed his right hand over his chest, then extended it toward me, palm up. The gesture was unmistakable. Acknowledgement, offering, perhaps thanks. Then he vanished into the trees, leaving me shaking with adrenaline and wonder. I retrieved the paper with trembling hands. His symbols were complex, layered, some resembling landscapes or maps, others more abstract. But certain elements repeated. The circle motif, vertical lines that might represent trees or beings, and one symbol that appeared multiple times, a form that looked like 2 figures, one smaller beside one larger, connected by a horizontal line. Relationship, teaching, continuation. The carved figure was extraordinary, smooth, ancient feeling, depicting something that stood upright but was not human. Self-representation, cultural artifact, the knotted cord, counting system, record-keeping. Back at the cabin, I laid everything out and photographed it from every angle before beginning analysis. The carved figure showed tool marks consistent with stone blade work. The wood was cedar, aged but preserved with some kind of oil or resin. The knotted cord had 13 knots, irregularly spaced. Years, moons, significant events. I added everything to the journal, then wrote a new entry. 3/17/2025, communication breakthrough, direct exchange of visual symbolic systems. He understands representation, possesses his own graphic language, retains cultural artifacts. Objects suggest long-term memory keeping, self-concept, teaching tradition, numerical or chronological tracking. Query: who taught him? How old is this system? Is he the last keeper of this knowledge? Implication: if he is alone, if there are no others, then an entire symbolic culture, potentially thousands of years old, resides in one aging individual. No students, no continuation. What dies with him is larger than one life. It's an entire way of seeing, speaking, remembering. Raymond knew this. That's why he kept the secret. That's why he trusted so few. That's why he made me promise. Bear witness, but don't expose. Let him live out his time in dignity, not as specimen or spectacle. New protocol established. We teach each other. I show him I can learn, that the pattern continues. He shows me what he needs me to know, to perhaps carry forward as memory even after he's gone. This is no longer just about feeding. It's about being the last witness to something irreplaceable. The rain hammered against the cabin roof. I sat by the wood stove, holding the carved figure, and wondered what stories it could tell, what histories were knotted into that cord, what names his people had for themselves, what songs they sang when there were still enough of them to sing with. Outside, the forest held its secrets close. But inside the cabin, two languages were trying to meet across the unbridgeable gap, finding common ground in symbol and stone, in the stubborn human need to connect even across the borders of species, to say, I see you, you matter, you are not alone in your ending. Spring came wet and cold, the Olympics shrouded in fog that turned the forest into something primordial. By May, our communication had evolved beyond simple exchanges. He would leave complex arrangements that told stories, sequences showing seasonal changes, animal movements, danger areas shifting with weather patterns. I learned to read the forest as he saw it, a living system where every element connected, where human presence registered as disruption or, in rare cases, as something that could be woven into the pattern without destroying it. But something was changing. The deliveries disappeared more slowly. Sometimes food remained for days. I found him once, in early June, sleeping near the North Meadow, actually visible, unconcerned by my presence. He looked diminished, his breathing labored. When I approached to within 20 feet, he opened his eyes but didn't startle. Just watched me with an expression I interpreted as exhaustion. I left salmon and berries within arm's reach and retreated. When I returned that evening, the food was gone, and he'd left a new arrangement, a circle of stones, broken on one side. The symbol for ending. The journal entries grew heavier. 6/8/2025, weight loss evident, breathing seems impaired. Left willow bark tea, salicylic acid, anti-inflammatory, mild pain relief, in addition to food. Gone by evening. Will monitor. 6/15/2025, found him near East Creek, sitting on the bank. He'd been digging roots. Spring beauty, I think, but left them scattered. Coordination issues, cognitive decline. He's old. How old? Raymond never estimated. 60, 70. Their lifespan unknown. Signs suggest he's approaching end stage. 6/20/2025. Arrangement at North Meadow. Complex symbol I haven't seen before. Resembles a map. Sticks and stones forming terrain features with one vertical stack at center marked with his carved figure. He wants to show me something. Location? Tomorrow I'll follow. The next day, I tracked the map arrangement to a location 2 miles northeast in old-growth territory I'd marked as prohibited. The path took me through magnificent forest, centuries-old cedars forming a canopy so dense the understory was cathedral dark. Nurse logs sprawled like sleeping giants, their backs gardens of hemlock seedlings and mushroom bloom. I found the vertical stack marker, stones piled waist-high, unmistakable, and beyond it, hidden in a natural hollow where 3 ancient cedars grew from a shared root base. Something that stopped me cold. A repository, a cache, a library. Inside the hollow, protected from weather by overlapping cedar boughs, he'd stored objects. Carved figures like the one he'd given me, dozens of them, each slightly different. Knotted cords, some with hundreds of knots, preserved in oiled wrappings. Bundles of bark with marks scratched into them. Pictographs, symbol sequences, things that looked like star charts or maps. Stone tools, hafted and unhafted, arranged by type. Cedar bark weavings. Something that might have been a basket, collapsed with age. And bones, not human I thought, but close, carefully bundled and marked with symbols I now recognized as his graphic language. This was archive. This was cultural storage. This was what remained when a people shrank to one. I photographed everything without touching, marking the GPS coordinates, documenting position and orientation. Then I saw what he'd left for me. A bundle separated from the others, wrapped in fresh cedar bark, tied with careful intention. Inside, 3 carved figures, Raymond, me and him, arranged together. A knotted cord with 44 knots. And a drawing on bark, his work, showing the cabin, the forest, the North Meadow, and 2 figures side by side. The message was clear. This is yours now. Not to own, but to protect. I'm teaching you where it is because I won't be here to guard it. I sat in that sacred space and understood the weight of what was being asked. If I told anyone, researchers, anthropologists, conservationists, they would come, with good intentions certainly, to document, preserve, study, but also to extract, to analyze, to own. The forest would fill with cameras, scientists, infrastructure. The archive would go to museums. His remains, when he died, would go to labs, and he'd chosen not to have that. 44 years of relationship with Raymond, now passed to me, was built on the promise: you can know, but you cannot tell. You can witness, but you cannot expose. The dignity of dying in home territory, undisturbed, means more than the knowledge science could gain. I rewrapped the bundle, placed it back exactly as I'd found it, and marked the location in my private journal with coordinates I'd encrypt. Then I followed his map back to the North Meadow. He was there, waiting, in daylight, sitting on the fallen cedar, arms resting on his knees, looking more tired than I'd yet seen him. I stopped at the clearing edge. "I understand," I said aloud, knowing he'd register tone if not words. "I'll protect it, I promise." He made a sound, not quite vocalization, more a long exhale that might have been relief. Then he gestured, "Approach." I walked slowly across the meadow, heart pounding, and sat on the cedar trunk 10 feet from him. Up close, the details overwhelmed. The grey in his hair, the scars on his hands and forearms, the way one shoulder sat higher than the other, old injury. The smell of him, muskier now, perhaps illness. His face was expressive in repose, heavier brow ridge than human, flatter nose, but the eyes were kin, dark, tired, intelligent, carrying something that looked achingly like loneliness. We sat together for an hour. He showed me his hands, letting me see the swollen joints, the tremor in the fingers. Arthritis advanced. He touched his chest, his breathing, and I heard the rasp. Pulmonary issue, perhaps pneumonia, or worse. He was telling me, "I'm failing." Then he did something extraordinary. He reached into his pouch and withdrew a bundle of bark strips, each marked with symbols. He laid them out in sequence, a visual narrative. I recognized elements. The cabin symbol, repeated across time. Raymond's face symbol, aging through versions, then crossed out, death. My symbol appearing. The North Meadow, food offerings, seasons cycling. And then, toward the end of the sequence, his own symbol, the large humanoid figure, growing fainter, outlined rather than solid. Fading. This was autobiography. This was history. This was him telling me the story of the agreement from his perspective. The final bark strip showed the archive symbol, then my symbol, with a gesture mark I'd learned, meant carry or protect. Transfer of responsibility. "I will," I whispered. "I promise." He gathered the bark strips carefully, returned them to his pouch, and then offered me something new, his hand, palm up, in the human gesture of connection. I placed my hand in his. His palm was rough, warm, the grip gentle despite the size. We stayed like that for a long moment, two beings who shouldn't have been able to communicate, finding language in contact. Then he stood, slowly, using the cedar trunk for support. He looked at me once more, long and deliberate, then touched his chest, extended the hand toward me, the same gesture from months ago. Acknowledgement. He walked into the forest. I watched until he disappeared, knowing somehow that I'd just experienced a farewell. He didn't come for the next delivery, or the one after. By late June, the food sat untouched. I searched his territories carefully, following the protocols, never the no-go zones, always the marked paths. I found no sign, no arrangements, no symbols, no tracks. In early July, corvids began gathering at the East Creek site near the Archive Hollow. I followed them. He'd chosen well. The hollow where he'd stored his people's memory had a deeper chamber, one he'd enlarged over time. He lay there, curled on his side, positioned carefully, hands folded across his chest. Someone, himself in final lucidity, had arranged stones around him, covered him partially with cedar boughs, and placed his carved figure, the one he'd made of himself, in his hands. He'd left one more symbol, scratched in the earth beside him, the two-figure glyph, connected by a horizontal line. relationship continuing past death. I sat with him for a long time, this person I'd known for barely a year, but who carried centuries. No one would come for his body. No one would study his DNA, measure his bones, catalogue his organs. He would return to the forest as he'd lived in it, hidden, honoured, remembered only by those who'd shared the agreement. I took photographs, not of him, but of the space, the arrangement, the symbol, documentation for no one but myself. Then I did what felt right. I gathered more cedar boughs, covering him completely, making the burial deeper. I built the cairn higher, using stones from the creek, each one placed with intention. I brought offerings, salmon, berries, the items he'd favoured, and arranged them at the cairn's base, knowing the forest would take them. Then I carved a new figure, crude but earnest, representing him, and placed it in the archive with the others. I added a knotted cord with 45 knots for 45 years of the agreement. I wrapped both in cedar bark, marked with the symbols for remembered and honoured. Before I sealed the hollow completely, disguising it, protecting it, ensuring no casual hiker would ever find it, I photographed every object, every symbol, every carving. The documentation went into encrypted files, backed up across multiple secure locations, with instructions that they remain sealed for 50 years after my death. Maybe by then, we'd be wise enough to honor such things without destroying them. Maybe not. The forest grew over the archives naturally. Within 2 years, you wouldn't know they were there unless you knew exactly where to look and what to look for. I kept the deliveries for 5 more years just in case. The food always went untouched, taken by bears and corvids, but I honored the promise. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, like Raymond before me, maintaining the agreement even with ghosts. I finished my doctorate remotely, writing my dissertation on conservation ethics and the observer effect, though the real research lived in encrypted journals no committee would ever see. I taught at the university while spending every weekend at the cabin, walking the territories, reading the forest in a language almost no one alive could speak. Sometimes I left arrangements at the North Meadow. Practice, memorial, hope. They were never disturbed in ways that suggested understanding, but I maintained the vocabulary anyway, keeping the grammar alive for 1 more generation, just in case. The rules of the forest, as he'd taught them to me through Raymond, through patience, through 45 years of trust. Rule 1. Some beings choose invisibility as survival. Honor that choice over your own curiosity. Rule 2. Relationship across difference requires slow time. Years, decades. Don't rush intimacy. Earn trust through consistency. Rule 3. Protect what's shared with you more fiercely than you'd protect your own secrets. Betrayal ends more than one life. Rule 4. Intelligence takes many forms. Your language isn't the only language. Your science isn't the only knowledge. Rule 5. Some things matter more as mystery than as discovery. Not everything rare should be saved by making it visible. Rule 6. The forest remembers. So must you. Memory is the only immortality some people get. Rule 7. When you're the last keeper of someone's story, tell it only to those who will honor it as the sacred trust it is. I tell this now because I'm old, because the cabin will pass to someone else, because maybe there's one person who'll read this and understand. We shared this forest with others. They're gone now, mostly, maybe completely, but they were here. They were people. Different people, people who chose the long quiet over our loud world, but people nonetheless. Raymond taught me that. The one at North Meadow taught me that. And now, if you've read this far, you carry that knowledge too. What you do with it, whether you respect the silence or break it, that's the final test of the agreement. The forest is watching. Still, always. Choose carefully. If this story moved you, resonated with you, or made you think differently about our relationship with the wild and the unknown, I invite you to subscribe to the channel for more speculative fiction that blends scientific rigor with deep ethical questions. Share your thoughts in the comments, but remember Rule 7. Some conversations are best held quietly between those who understand what's at stake. Until next time, walk carefully in the forests you think you know.